Welcome everyone. I am Innari, MC for 2020 International Garden Symposium. Nice to meet you all. 2020 International Garden Symposium is joined by leading experts of urban garden from home and abroad. Through representations and discussions with these experts, we look into the trends and various functionalities of gardens. The symposium this year is jointly organized by Korea National Arboretum and Seoul Metropolitan Government under the theme of Garden, the Future of Cities. Prior to the keynote speech and general discussion, themed presentations have been released first for a week so that the viewers could gain insight in advance. From October 8th, 6 themed presentation videos have been uploaded on YouTube channels, and the last themed presentation was uploaded earlier today. And I hope that you enjoyed the video uploaded today. We will begin the general discussion soon. We'll have a keynote speech as well, and we hope that it was all useful presentations for all of you as well. We have a keynote speech by a worldly famous garden designer, Piet Adolf, so I hope that you are excited about that as well. Before we begin the symposium, we will introduce domestic experts who will join the discussion. First, Chairman Yumi Lee of Sejong National Arboretum is here with us. Also, we have Professor Jin-Woo Kwon of Yeongnam University, who will be the moderator for discussion later as well. Next, we have Director Hae Young-jin of Garden Research Center of Korea National Arboretum. We also have Chairman In-ho Kim, Chairman of 2020 International Garden Symposium Organizing Committee. So these 4 experts from Korea will join 2020 International Garden Symposium. Before we begin the symposium, we have a special 2 events for the live viewers, so let me introduce on that. First event is about finding the hidden 2020 IGS logo. You can see the 2020 IGS logo in the screen. When this logo is turned into gold color, then you have to capture this during the symposium and upload it on your Instagram account with hashtag #2020IGS. And we'll select 5 viewers and we'll send you coupons that you can exchange to gifts. So we ask for your active participation. If you miss the golden logo, you can wait for the second event as well. IGS 2020, I want to know about you. So for the future and the present of a garden, if you have questions that you wanted to know, then upload it on YouTube comments. Then we'll select it as a Q&A session questions, and we'll also send you gifts when your question is selected as well. So if you had any questions before about the garden, so please upload it on YouTube channel. For a more detailed way of participation, you can check our Instagram page. So we ask for your active participation. Now let's begin 2020 International Garden Symposium. First of all, we will have some greetings from those who helped us to organize this event. Deputy Mayor for Administrative Affairs, Mr. Hak-jin Kim, and Jong-ho Park, the Minister of Korea Forest Service, will deliver some welcome speech. First, we'll have a welcome speech from Deputy Mayor for Administrative Affairs.
안녕하십니까. 서울시 행정 2부 시장 김학진입니다. 오늘 심포지엄 공동 개최를 위해 아낌없는 지원과 도움을 주신 박종호 산림청장님과 국립수목원 관계자분들께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드리며 코로나19로 인해 서울국제정원박람회 오프라인 행사가 연기되었음에도 불구하고 온라인 심포지움에 흔쾌히 참여해 주신 피트 아우돌프 정원 디자이너를 비롯한 국내외 연사분들께도 감사의 인사를 전합니다. 2020 서울국제정원 박람회를 맞아 비대면 온라인으로 일주일간 진행되는 이번 심포지움은 세계 주요 도시 전문가들과 다양한 의견을 나누고 도시정원, 공공정원, 도시재생 등에 관심 있는 시민들에게 보다 폭넓게 다가갈 수 있는 좋은 기회가 되리라 생각합니다. 서울시는 2013년부터 서울 도심의 곳곳을 좀 더 깨끗한 녹색 환경으로 만들고자 시민들이 스스로 일상생활 속에서 꽃과 나무를 심고 가꾸는 시민주도형 도시녹화 운동인 서울 꽃으로 피다 캠페인을 추진하고 있습니다. 또한 2019년 서울 꽃으로 피다 시즌2를 통해 미세먼지, 폭염 등 기후변화에 대응하고 일상 가드닝에 대한 시민 수요를 반영한 입체적이고 다각적인 도시 녹화 사업을 추진해 오고 있습니다. 특히 기존의 정형화된 박람회 형태에서 벗어나 마을 속으로 찾아가는 도시재생형 정원 박람회를 통해 생활 속 정원 문화를 확산시키고 서울시만의 고유한 콘텐츠를 지속적으로 확장해 나가며 가치 있는 정원 박람회를 만들기 위해 열정을 다하고 있습니다. 오늘 서울시 산림청 국립수목원이 공동 주최하는 국제정원 심포지엄의 주제는 정원, 도시의 미래입니다. 대한민국 서울을 비롯한 미국, 영국 등 5개국의 다양한 전문가들이 참가하여 도시의 녹색 인프라로서 공공정원의 역할을 재정립하는 귀중한 자리가 될 것입니다. 또한 공공정원, 도시재생, 생물다양성 등의 주제 발표와 더불어 조경, 정원 분야가 앞으로 나아가야 할 방향을 함께 논의하게 된 것에 매우 뜻깊게 생각합니다. 아무쪼록 이번 심포지엄을 통해 도시의 미래적인 측면에서 조경 녹지 분야가 큰 역할을 할 수 있도록 좋은 발전 방안이 도출되기를 기원합니다. 2020 서울국제정원 박람회의 오프라인 행사는 아쉽게도 연기되었지만 어려운 상황 속에서도 온라인 심포지엄 개최에 힘써주신 관계자 여러분들과 끝까지 관심과 격려 보내주신 시민분들께 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 꽃과 나무를 이웃과 함께 심고 가꾸며 녹색도시 서울, 정원도시 서울을 만들기 위해 최선을 다하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hak-jin Kim, for your remarks. Next, we'll have a welcome remark from Jong-ho Park, the Minister of Korea Forest Service.
여러분 반갑습니다. 산림청장 박종호입니다. 2020 국제정원 심포지엄 개최를 진심으로 기쁘게 생각합니다. 먼저 심포지엄을 위해 수고해 주신 서울특별시와 국립수목원 관계자분들께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 정원계의 거장 피트 아울도프님을 비롯하여 참여해 주신 많은 분들께 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 지금 대한민국은 전 세계가 겪고 있는 코로나와 같은 질병, 인구 감소, 고령화 사회, 개인 중심의 생활 패턴 변화 등으로 삶의 질 향상과 건강에 대한 관심이 높아지고 있습니다. 도시 속 각박한 삶에서 자연에 대한 향수가 점점 커지고 이에 따라 정원 분야에 대한 국민의 관심도 매우 높아지고 있습니다. 산림청은 이에 대응하기 위하여 정원 관련 정책을 확대하고 생활 밀착형 정원 등 인프라를 확충해 나가고 있습니다. 또한 금년에는 제2차 정원 기본 계획을 수립 중에 있습니다. 이를 위해 내년도 정부 안에는 정원 관련 예산을 55% 증액하였으며 앞으로도 국민들이 체감할 수 있는 정원 문화를 만들어 나가겠습니다. 대한민국 정원 분야의 발전을 위하여 오늘 이 자리에 관심을 갖고 참여해 주신 여러분께 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드리며 전 세계가 심리적으로 어려움을 겪고 있는 이 시점에 정원 심포지엄이 희망의 메시지를 줄 수 있는 좋은 계기가 될 것으로 기대합니다. 국민과 국가가 함께 발을 맞추어 몸과 마음이 행복할 수 있는 정원 문화가 뿌리 깊게 자리 잡을 수 있도록 산림청도 적극 동참하겠습니다. 오늘 심포지엄에서 정원 선지구의 저명한 연사들의 고견과 국민들의 다양한 의견을 듣고 발전 방향을 모색하는 소중한 기회가 되길 바랍니다. 참석하신 모든 분들의 건강과 행복을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Chung-won Park of Korea Forest Service, for your welcome speech. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we could only see him via video. We hope to see situation get better soon and see all audience here with us next year. Next, we'll have a keynote speech by designer Pete Adolf. While preparing for his speech, he told us that he would like to meet all of you soon in Korea. Unfortunately, we can only see his keynote speech via video. Now let's watch the keynote speech by designer Pete Adolf.
Hello, my name is Piet Oudolf and I welcome you to the International Garden Symposium. I'm very happy to take part in this and I hope you enjoyed this day and so that you can learn something of what we do here in Europe. Yeah, we started in 1982. Together with my wife, we moved from a western area of the Netherlands to this rural area in the eastern part of the Netherlands to start a nursery. We had a design office where we were focused on planting design, but we found that we needed to learn more than what we knew. So we started a nursery, and by creating gardens around our house and traveling a lot through Europe to other gardens, we discovered that there was very much to learn. Traditionally, when we came here in 1982, the garden tradition was very much focused on England and on traditional gardening. Traditional gardening, in our opinion, was very decorative. It had to do with beautiful flowers. And if the flowers were gone, you could replace them in the garden, so it was very high maintenance. By learning to know some people that came from the wild side of gardening, from native plants, we started to learn that plants had more to offer than just flowers, that plants had character, that plants had a place where they would like to live and how they wanted to live together with other plants. So by talking with them, we became friends, but also it changed my insight on how plants could be used. So in the early 80s, 1980s, we changed our ideas about gardening. We started to collect plants that had more a reference to the wild, you know, that they were more original, no double flowers, plants that looked more natural, plants that even came from the wild, but had a very good garden use. They were not aggressive, they flowered beautiful, and they attracted a lot of insects. And that was, for all us, the start of see how we could use that in gardens. So I started to use that first in our trial borders here in Hummelo. And then later, when we started to do garden design again, when people asked us to do a garden, we also used them in gardens. And by using grasses and other plants that referred more to the wild, the gardens were going to look different than the traditional gardens. And that's why we got a lot of attention by already, let's say, the early 90s from the press and from magazines that wanted to show that to the people, that it was different but also beautiful. So the way we garden has an aesthetic that refers to the wild, but has nothing to do with wilderness. It is something that refers to what you know from the wild. It's a romantic translation of the wild into the garden. And after all these years, because it's now 2020, we developed that practice, that idea, into something that has taken over in a big garden, in the big gardening world all over Europe and the United States of America and further. People are interested how we could do that. So a lot of questions we get, about maintenance, about are the plants not too wild, do we use native plants, do we not use native plants, and all these answers, of course we can give an answer to, but what we try to do is just motivate people to look different at plants and plantings. We try to motivate people to use plants that attract insects, bees and butterflies, that contribute to a community of other plants and to together look like something that belongs together. I think that is what we try to do. And you can imagine that visiting conferences in the early 80s, we had time enough to travel because the nursery was very small. We met people in conferences from public parks, director of public parks. And my first commission was a small park in Sweden. That was in Enköping, and it was a small garden next to a library. And we designed that, and that garden became an example of modern gardening in Sweden. So it was taken often as how you could do a public space in a city. So from one garden came another. So in the year 2000, that was, of course, I had done suddenly a lot of commissions came to me. And from private gardens, we moved into public gardens. And public gardens, as we all know, we did in New York, we did in Toronto, an entrance of a botanical garden. In England, we did the Royal Horticultural Society, and many more. The Lurie Garden in Chicago. And nowadays, most of my emphasis on what I like to do is on public space, because public space, you get a reaction of millions of people that probably don't have a garden themselves. Also, get an idea how plants could look. Those plantings I do remind people from nature. They remind people of how they probably were a child and were playing in nature. Or probably, if they haven't seen a plant, at least they meet plants in a situation that it looks very beautiful and might help them to start gardening. So all these little facts and all these little things grew out to something very international today. And I think that is what I try to do with my work. And I hope that we notice, of course, that also in Asia, Japan, China, and Korea especially, we have many, many admirers in Korea. I noticed that when I was in China last year. They even flew over from Korea to meet me at the symposium. So I have a big sympathy for your country and your enthusiasm for gardening. Yes, how do we find the money for public gardens, for the gardens I do in the countries? And maybe it's good to say that there's a big difference between Europe and America, and maybe Asia, I have no idea. Governmental, probably the government can pay for a garden, or the municipality often does, but because my biggest work is in America, and all the money raised for the battery, for the High Line and the Lurie Garden is raised by public donors. And a donor is different than a sponsor. A sponsor wants his name on a project, and a donor, he just wants to donate money because he wants to be part of the community that creates that garden. On the other hand, of course, they can take it off from their taxes. They can draw it off from taxes. So it has a benefit for the donor to give money to gardens, because it is also in his interest that he gets it back from taxes. And the other hand, but also what I know in America, what I noticed, that the donors are really connected to what they do. In Europe, it's almost that the municipality gives the money for a project, and I think there's a certain amount of money that they give, and often there's no money for maintenance. So the gardens have to be done by the city themselves, by different crews of gardeners, which often goes wrong because nobody feels attached to the work. They just want to clean it up, and maintenance is something that you would say needs care, and care of a particular gardener that understands the garden. So that's why in Europe, of the gardens I've made, some have failed because of good gardening. In America, the bigger projects also take care to get money for maintenance over a longer period. So in the Lurie Garden, it has millions donated, put down in the bank for maintenance. So every year the maintenance can be paid from that. By having this money for maintenance, you can hire a responsible garden for that project, that stays on the project, that can learn to know the project and also feels responsible for the project. That is most important. In Europe, if you're lucky, you can get the community, let's say the municipality, involved and convince them that you need one person for the particular area for the responsibility. But that is hard to get. So I think maintenance is an issue on itself. It needs money, it needs responsibility for we need the right gardener, and it needs to be, the money needs to be there for more than 10 years, for the lifespan of that garden. Yeah, what do gardens mean for the well-being of people? I know for sure in the time we live now that gardens play a very important role for us. We are under stress these times by not only COVID and everything that plays in our world. People are stressed by the pressure on their work but we notice that, and also doctors notice nowadays that patients, they cure better, they get better easier when they are going into nature or in gardens. I feel better when I'm in my garden. You feel that something happens with you. You get happier and you get more optimistic when you look at plants and you look at the beauty of it. And we just had a commission this early year from a big hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Denmark, that are creating an hospital where all the rooms are around the garden, so that every patient can look into the garden for their well-being. And I think that is the future, that even hospitals and doctors are looking for opportunities to get their patients better and happier when they're in hospital. And you see nowadays that more and more communities, municipalities are creating gardens and parks in the cities, because they now believe indeed that in the time we live in and the environment that we see going down, that it's not so good with our environment, that we need green to make us alert of what is happening and also make us feel better and aware of what is going on. Yeah, for the future, of course, for the future we need more public space, more public gardens, and I think that will happen. I think the government and also locally people are more aware that that they have to do that with this congestion of buildings in cities. We need to keep an eye on how much green space we need between the buildings. And I think that's taken care of more and more today. And I would say for the future, of course, it's for mental health especially that we need it. And also it creates awareness that's that we need it as a person. It's part of ourselves. Nature and gardens belong to human beings. And more people should understand that. Yeah, this is where we live and work, Hummelo. You see, this place we bought in 1982. It's a farmhouse with a piece of land where we started our garden and nursery. This is how it is looking today. Not today, but this year. Our garden totally changed from the beginning. In the beginning it was very traditional, and now you see it has a very natural look by the use of many grasses. Just to give you an idea of the overall insight. And you see we use plants all over the place. We created borders for people to look at. The plants we use, they attract a lot of insects, as you see, bees and butterflies. And when we talk about nature and gardens, we were influenced to garden making that could be described as naturalistic or ecological. But we don't make gardens that are pure examples of those concepts. So we would like to speak of gardens that are inspired by nature. We reproduce nature's outward form, and that's what we call naturalistic. Today's garden designers seek inspiration from a variety of sources. Among this is nature. It's perhaps a relatively recent choice, a reflection of changing attitudes to the natural world. So you see there are places that hardly grow any plants, but this is on the shore of East Anglia, where still some cabbage species grow with some Cantranthus. Or we can find inspiration in prairies in North America because the richness of species is so big and it is so beautiful to walk through it that you get ideas for gardens. And like here in the Lurie garden, you see that the Echinacea you see and the Pycnotum, they are pure 100% native plants. So using natives and non-natives in gardens is for me a very important thing. So here we see Liatris in the wild, and here you see it used in a public space in Amsterdam. Or you meet beautiful fall colors in nature. This is in the Pine Barrens under New York and Pennsylvania. But you can give the same feeling on a project you do, like here on the High Line. So designing with plants, plants are being examined in a different light than color alone. You know that color is a big issue in gardens, but for me is shape and form, I think, are the key for a successful planting design. So we use grasses. Grasses look very wild, so they blend a lot of strong colors and strong characters of plants. As you see here, it gives this sort of wildness. And we use umbellifers, so they have also this natural feeling, this sort of wild feeling of meadows. And I think including those in your planting create already a sort of wildness in your style. So natural planting, using plants that have the same needs or belong to the same habitat is important to make your planting work well. That your gardens show the year round is also important. So it should be interesting through all the seasons, like in February till June, you need the whole cycle, you know, starting in February, then April, May, June with very early flowering plants. And this is early summer, and then June, September, we have the next generation of flowering plants come over. We're here with astrantia and irises, eryngium and sages, and you see it's a lot of richdom in this time of the year. So July till September, October, so a lot of plants and it's a lot of richdom in the garden. And October to January, one would say, yeah, is there still anything in flower? Yes, it can be very rich still, but you see most of the plants are just decaying. So seed heads are coming out, plants are over the top of flowering, still flowering at the same time. You see there's a lot of seeds coming into the plants. And in the winter, even the seed heads can be very important to look like. Here you see skeletons, and if you look at it, it's nothing to do with flowers anymore. It has to do with character and how you feel in the time that it is happening. So in the winter you don't want flowers, and in the winter you expect skeletons. This is our garden, late November, I think, no, early November. So also for a public space, it's important that gardens live long. And you can do that easy by using very strong plants. But there are more than just grasses to make a garden live long. This is the battery, so the garden is there already for 17 years. Or the Lurie garden, also, let's say designed in 2000, and this is 17 years old, under the lead of a good gardener. The RHS Wisley, we planted that in 2001. With good design, strong plants, and this was the first few years, and this was last year. So the garden is 18, 19 years old. And if you look in the detail, it might be a little bit tired, but we can still live with it. But at the end, we will change it soon. I was asked to do a new design, different. So, public projects, international. That is, of course, where it is all about, you know. And we started also in 2000 with Fakenham in England, which is a meadow. And they asked me to do a design for this area, which is a big public space. It's a bird reserve, and they wanted to make it more attractive with perennials. Here you see how it is looked like, and you see how it is looks in the winter. So you see, it's winter can be as interesting as long as you keep your eyes open. A second public space is on a gallery. It's an open garden to the public, but it's a gallery of contemporary art. And we did this garden 6 years ago. You see here the footprint of our design. So the design has 1, 2, or 3 different concepts. You can see there's one concept, the pond. There's the middle piece that is a planting, and this is a more than natural planting. And then on the side we have tall plants. You can see it's very well designed. There's a lot happening. And this is an overall picture by Jason Ingram. You see this looks completely sort of natural, but of course on the other hand you can see it is designed. Beautiful picture again, so you can fall in love with your own work as long as the plants do their work well. Skarholmen, a social housing project where they pay for the garden when they renovate the houses. And this was also, I think, 10 years, 12 years ago that we built this garden. You have to take care of how people move from one area to another area. You can see that the path is made by people, and we kept that in the design. So important in garden making, especially in public space, that you know how people walk, how they travel, and I think, and you can keep that, work that out in your design. The Lurie Garden in Chicago is another place where I was asked to be part of a design competition in 2000, which we won with G&N from the US, a landscape architectural office. And you see, this is how we built up the garden with foam, so you can create a real landscape. And this is the sort of first ideas by Gustafsson, the landscape architect, and I had to translate that into a planting. So the ideas don't always come from myself. The narrative or the story of a garden can come from the leading landscape architect. Especially when it is bigger, we need to team up together to make things happen. You know, I cannot do all the technical things, and also sometimes the design is too comprehensive and too complicated to do it yourself. So here we see the garden laid out, and here it is executed, and it's already a few years old. You see here these sages here that give this blue ribbon through the garden. It's also a seasonal aspect because most of the garden is not in flower, and this is June, where this middle part is totally full in flower. This is later, a little later. Then the battery, you can see we did the area here in the year 2001. After 9/11, they asked me to do this garden on the front as a sort of remembrance for the victims and family of the victims of 9/11. The garden looked really sort of desolate, and we created something more active, more dynamic, where people could be in. You see, the whole park was about to be renovated. A stony place became a park where millions of people go to, and you see how important it is that not only that people meet plants in public, but also that you make a garden that can have the stress of so many people that walk through it. So another park in Germany, which I think is also one of my favorites, it was created 10 years ago. And you see, it's a big park. It's about 7,000 square meters of planting design. And 7,000 square meters is 70,000 square feet. It's 1¾ of an acre in English. And you see a good mix of perennials that cover all the seasons. You see, this was last 14 days ago. So you see, even at this time of the year, it's enough to experience. You see, it's not all, here you can see that it is not about flowers at all. If you count the number of flowering plants, it's very low. And then my biggest project, and that was when I was asked to take part in a competition in New York with James Corner Field Operations. And we won the competition in 2004 and started to design. The garden was opened. You see it's 2.5, more than 2 kilometers long. It's 1.5 mile. And as you can see, there is a story. So you start with grasslands, and then the sun deck, an avenue square, a grassland. So there's, let's say, 12, 14 different gardens over the whole length, and you can see that in color. So if you have a narrow strip which you want to design, I think you should take care of how people experience this, because you don't want to experience one idea. This is about 12 and more ideas about planting. So you go from one ambience, one idea into another idea. Very important to think of where you are and what is needed and how big it is. So scale is important. Whether it's where it's situated is important. So many other things to think about. Here you see the length, and So it opened in 2009. And it was a success immediately, but if you imagine that from expected 200,000 visitors a year, that last year it was 8 million almost that people came over. So with this narrow paths, it became very sort of complicated to get people in the right direction. So it was a lot of over visited. And of course, this year with COVID-19, I think they had to close the park and it's now one direction and maybe not so many tourists that will come. But this is the High Line, of course, the most successful parks in the world. I'm very happy that I could work on it and show people that planting can do a lot to make a garden and public space a success, because this is a true example of how plants can make a garden to a success. Of course, where it is located, like in the city, can make it interesting. But what we all know is that the garden's planting was one of the important things to win the competition. Here you see how it was, and here you see how it is today. You can imagine everything is covered. There's not much soil in it. I think the depth of soil you can see here is maybe 30 centimeters, and they can mount it up at some places, but we have to take care what plants will grow here. And in this particular space, we used a lot of plants that are very strong, stressful, don't need much water, and survive in these conditions. Also here you can see that how it was found, and that and how it looks now. You can see this is the building with the entrance, and here you can see the planting that is done. Where needed, the planters were elevated so that there was more depth for trees. You see those bulbs that we also integrated in the planting. And so we cover, with also trees and shrubs, we cover 4 seasons of interest. This is summer, 19th Street, 20th Street, flowering, cercis. And see, that is how it was found. So it needs imagination from the landscape architect to create something that people want to go to. And you see they do that by just creating these bridges, these overflows that you go, above your planting, that you can look downwards and that you can walk through the trees. You can see that it's the full color of the mainly native trees we have used in that area. And here you can see how they built up the soil. And the level of soil is very low on this side, a little bit taller on this side. And then you can see what will grow there. So also covering with a lot of bulbs, you see the Eremerus and the allium in among the plants. You can see that the plants are just in between the bulbs. So the interest is already there in May. And this is our, let's say, one of our latest projects. And I think this is the Delaware Botanical Garden. And you see it looks completely like it is nature, but it is designed. We used 80% of the native plants. And I say native plants, it's not necessarily to use only native plants. I think there's a lot of plants that can benefit and that are good for the environment, even in locally, without disturbing your local local flora. They are just contributing by another flowering season, or by maybe creating nectar for bees and butterflies and other insects. Here you see how that park looks after the opening last year in 1919. And here you can see the result, you know, from above. Here you can see that it is designed. Yeah, and here you see that even in Korea there was a publisher that had the courage to translate our book about plants. You know, probably not all the plants are available, but it's like maybe it tells you something about the interest in Asian countries, and I'm very pleased that our kind of plantings and our ideas take place all over the world. I think not maybe with the same plants, but with the same starting ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating in the symposium, and we hope to come over when COVID is over and we can travel again. And I'm very curious to see how you Korean garden and what you think of our ideas translated to your cities. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
Did you all enjoy Keynote speech by Pete Adolf? In the city, there are some features that a garden should have, and it was a meaningful time to see his design principles for urban gardens and visions for future urban gardens as well. It was a meaningful speech. Personally, as a person who live in the COVID-19 era, I was feeling more relaxed watching all these pictures of the gardens. Thank you, Mr. Pete Adolf, for a wonderful speech. Before we begin the general discussion, let me introduce the live events for viewers again. We have 2 events in total. For the first event, you will see a gold event logo hidden during the symposium. If you capture this during the symposium, when the logo changes into gold color, and upload the picture on your Instagram account with hashtag 2020IGS, we'll select 5 people and send vouchers for gifts. So you will have to focus on our symposium. Even if you missed the golden logo, you can join our second event, IGS 2020 I Want to Know About You event. For the future and the current status of the gardens, if you have questions regarding this, please upload it on the YouTube comment section, and we will select 5 questions and answer the questions during Q&A session, and we'll also send a gift for that as well. So if you have any questions, then please upload it on YouTube comment section. You can also check our Instagram account for a more detailed way to participate. Now, let's begin 2020 International Garden Symposium general discussion. Along with the Korean experts I introduced earlier, we have 5 panelists from abroad who will join the discussion. You have already met them through themed presentation videos. Unfortunately, for this year, they could not be here with us because of COVID-19. But they will join the discussion via video conference. So let me introduce 5 panelists one by one. First, we have the keynote speaker, Pete Adolf, a garden designer. Next, we are joined by Assistant Professor So-hyun Park of University of Connecticut. Also, we have Executive Director Mike Munder of Cambridge Conservation Initiative. We are also joined by Dr. Natasha De Veer, Head of Conservation and Research of the National Botanic Garden of Wales. Lastly, we are joined by Preston Fumiaki Takano of Asia Pacific Region of International Federation of Landscape Architects. So the 5 panelists who will join us today for the general discussion. Professor Chin Kwon of Landscape Architecture from Yongnam University will be the moderator for the general discussion. Please, Professor.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the symposium, and we will now begin the panel discussion session. My name is Kwon-jin Uk, as introduced. So the first presentation was from Mr. Friedman, and the last presentation was from Director Jin, who talked about gardens in Korea. And just now, we saw the keynote speech from Mr. Piet Oudolf. So we've had 7 presentations and 1 keynote speech over the 1-week period of the IGS 2020. Based on the presentations, I would like to proceed with the panel discussion session. So 2 speakers could not join us today, so we are joined by 6 speakers, and we ask for your understanding. Now, with the 6 speakers, I would like to kick off the panel discussion session. So this session consists of 4 parts. Part 1, the Korean speakers will talk about some topics that they would like to share with the international speakers, and they will ask questions to the international speakers. And in part 2 and part 3, we will have some topic discussions where the panelists as well as the speakers will talk under one theme. And in part 4, since this is streamed live, this is for you. So I would like to ask all the viewers to ask questions, and we will select 5 questions from the viewers and entertain those questions. But when you upload your question on the comment section, make sure that you address your question to a specific speaker. So to Mr. Piet Oudolf, what can we do to create beautiful gardens? That would be one example of how you can participate to our session. I look forward to your participation. We will now begin part 1. So for the past 1 week, at 7:30, I watched the presentation, and it felt like, I watched a whole movie or 1 season of a TV series. So my first question goes to Professor Park.
Long time no see, Professor. You mentioned about community garden, and you emphasized about the community participation. What's the biggest obstacle that blocks the community participation? That's my question. So if you can tell us about your trial error, then it will help us greatly when we create community garden. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'm very glad to see all those Korean colleagues and audience over there. To answer to your questions, yes, there are some challenges to create and facilitate the community gardens. So you definitely need a land, and you should get some approval sometimes, and you need to secure your funding as well. But I think there are ways to overcome these challenges. So you can think about the easement. So you can actually borrow the land from the owner of the land, or sometimes you can actually utilize the local professional groups to donate materials or equipment or their time. So I think that getting the initial resources, infrastructure, and support to kickstart the community garden is relatively easy, I would say. The big hurdle in my experience is to have the driving force that you had in the planning stages throughout the operation stages to keep it running. So it requires commitment and continuous engagement of participants. Because it's not a state park, right? It's not a state park that you pay your entry fees and enjoy and live. It needs constant care and your time and your labor and your energy and everything. So, and also management practices should be sustainable for you to enjoy next year. So I think it's more about, it's not just one thing that you can think about just to create it, but in the long term you have to keep that operate meaningful way. So for example, we had one community garden in a senior center in Thailand, Connecticut, the town where I live. And that's a beautiful small community garden, but people are not very interested as much when they create it. So they just need a more birding and just singing the wildlife and things like that. So I think it's more than a place to grow vegetation, but it's more about the people. So getting people more interested in the community garden and letting them know about what they are doing is really important. I think that's probably the key for success.
Thank you, Professor Park, for the facilitation of community gardens. You shared your experiences. Thank you very much. Next, Yumi Lee, Director, and then Director So-yeon Park as well will ask the question for the presenters as well. First, President Lee.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I work for the Korea National Arboretum, and my whole heart is dedicated to K&A. And I recently was transited to Sejong National Arboretum. And as you know, Sejong is a government complex city. It's like a big donut. It's a planned city. And it's actually, it looks like a donut because at the center there is our Sejong National Arboretum. So today we are here to talk about cities, communities, as well as citizen gardens, and those are some of the topics that I'm quite interested in, and that is why today's event holds much significance. So Mike, can you hear me? I have a question for you. Executive Director Mike Munder, you've visited Korea many times. And I know your love and enthusiasm for conservation of arboretums. And I remember this one time when you visited our DMZ garden in Korea, and we talked about the sterile land and how Koreans started planting trees. And for DMZ garden, we collected different plants, and you talked about, that it really encompassed and showed the values as well as the spirit of gardening. And during the Eden project, we actually worked together to restore gardens in Korea, and I still remember that very vividly, but now I've relocated to a city. And so I have a question about cities. So for the future of cities, the arboretums and botanical gardens, what should they put as a priority when they are built in cities? So what should be the priorities that we need to put in place when doing that?
Thank you. Director Lee, so good to see you again, and congratulations on your new job. I think it says a lot that you've put the Botanic Garden and the Arboretum in the heart of your city, so congratulations. I can't think of a better bit of symbolism. So if we look at what an urban Botanic Garden or Arboretum can do, it's an agent for change. It's a place where people come to be delighted, to enjoy landscapes and enjoy plants. But you should also be thinking how that Botanic Garden can drive the metabolism of the city, and particularly the biodiversity within the city. So there's two simple formulas I'm going to throw out. Around Cambridge, we have a number of conservation groups that have now adopted the challenge of doubling biodiversity on their land. So that's doubling the amount of habitat, doubling the diversity of native species. And I think that's a great opportunity for botanic gardens to say, right, how can we manage our land better for better biodiversity? And then the big challenge to put you in step with the Convention on Biological Diversity is, can you allocate 30% of your territory for your garden or arboretum to biodiversity? And then can you take that and stimulate the city government to allocate 30% of the land to conservation and biodiversity? And then that botanic garden has made an enormous contribution to global conservation and enriched the lives of every single citizen in that city. So there's a way of using very simple metrics. And I think the important thing to remember is we're looking at a gradient of land use. And I see a gradient that goes from a garden to a wilderness. There's no cutting line in between. And that, I think, is the wonder of horticulture as exemplified by Piet and his designs. You can start off with a characterization of the wild that supports pollinators and bring birds in, and then move your guests and your visitors through to totally wild landscapes on the edge of the city. So it's all about life, our life, and the life of the species we share this planet with.
You're right. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Executive Director Munder. You talked about how we can include botanical gardens and arboretums in cities.
Next, Director Hye Young-jin, please ask your question. Hello, I am Hye Young-jin, Director of Garden Research Center. While preparing for this symposium, all the presenters in different fields told us about their work, so I was already aware of what you were doing. But while watching all the presentation videos for a week, I was really inspired and impressed and touched. So thank you. And I'm very honored to be joining with you here today. I have a question to Natasha DeVere. There were some questions that I had after watching your video. You mentioned that you introduced about the National Botanic Garden of Wales. You are focusing on the research and conservation, sustainability, and also the education and the training for citizens as well. But as a National Botanic Garden, what are any project that's coming up next year or in the future related to the social roles of the botanic gardens or citizens' participation? And if you have any future project that you're planning, please introduce us more about that.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation to join you virtually. So hello from Wales. I think the area that I'm most interested in taking forward is how we work with rather than against nature in our gardens. Gardens are living ecosystems. They are a habitat, and humans are managers of that ecosystem. And every decision that we make, every tiny decision or big decision that we make within our garden can be for or against nature. And I'm interested in looking at how do we make every single decision to be for nature rather than against. To give you just one example of pollinators, which I do a lot of research on, pollinators are important for biodiversity, they're important for people in terms of pollination services, and we can encourage them into our garden. But we need to make decisions so that every plant that we plant is suitable. We need to be able to provide plants that supply for different pollinators, from bees to butterflies to hoverflies throughout the season. We need to make a choice between a single flowered plant or a double variety of a plant that will be good for pollinators rather than one that will not be. We also need to consider our use of pesticides. We can create a beautiful pollinator garden, but the plants may have been treated with pesticides either within the garden or before they come to us, so can harm rather than promote the pollinators that we wish to encourage. And again, using the idea of pollinators, an important thing about our gardens, and particularly our public gardens, is the ability of our citizens and the public to experience and connect with those gardens. And citizen science is a fabulous way of doing that. So again, using the example of, say, pollinators, these are very visible, whether it's butterflies or bees or hoverflies. People can visit gardens, they can see these particular insects and they can record them. And that starts to create a connection with nature and a greater connection with the garden as a source of nature. It can also be important for people's well-being. It can allow a chance to concentrate and to connect with the natural world, but also its interactions between the flowers and the pollinators. And so it's these ideas and exploring how to deliver these ideas, not just through science, but actually through practice, is what I'm most interested in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From Natasha De Vere, I believe that I can learn a lot about the pollinator, and I'll continue my studies so that I can talk to you properly next time.
Next, we have with us Professor Kim In-ho of IGS 2020 Organizing Committee. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, everyone. My name is Kim In-ho. I'm a professor at Chingu University here in Korea. So even if it wasn't COVID-19, I'm sure that we would be here meeting in person and listening to each other's presentations in person. It's a shame that we can only see you virtually, but I think that we are transcending space. And I was extremely excited to listen to such insightful presentations. So IGS 2020 carries many significance, one of which is to think about the future and that nature has a huge role to play going forward. And of course, because I am also chair of the botanical garden at my university, so I know how difficult it is to design the future of gardening as well as garden and landscape. So it was really an exciting opportunity for me to learn about international cases. I mean, Director Jin said she was really happy to listen to various presentations, and so was I. I have a question to President Takano-san. So personally, I met you 3 times. So you once visited Konkuk University in Korea. I was one of the panelists. And during the 2012 garden show with Professor Kim Ji-hyun, I actually visited Japan. And I was honored to actually listen to your explanation about the garden show. And you talked about Tokachi Millennium Forest at that time. And I was really impressed about that project. And there are some so outdated places, deteriorated places that you regenerate with garden. And you talked about the garden kado, the corridors. And I was really impressed by those projects as well. And I think it was one of the governors in some small town, and he said that his region was actually revitalized thanks to the garden show. And I really look forward to have such events in Korea as well. We have garden shows in Korea as well. But the top priority would be to engage more citizens so that we can promote the idea of gardens. So you had these projects in Hokkaido as well as projects in other regions. I'm sure that you have extensive know-hows on garden. And I'm sure that your know-hows can really help us really have that in Korea as well. So do you have anything to say on that? How we can do that in Korea?
Hello. It was nice to see you again. And it was a wonderful memory. We met at 2012 in Garden Show in Kamikawa. And I think I'd like to explain a little bit about movement in Hokkaido, garden movement in Hokkaido. And the garden movement had started 2002 by the citizens, about 120 garden lovers, and they really proud of their own garden. And they published a book, garden book. And two people who like to visit, they took those book and visited the gardens. And about 7 years later, among 120, the 7 reading garden is a good quality garden in a reasonable size. And they, of course, as a commercial basis, they charge the entrance fees to come in. Some private garden is sometimes they are free to come in. And but those 7 garden is they made some package tour, and they sell those package to the Tokyo and Osaka. And it was very successful. People love to travel around by this garden corridor, garden kaido. Then the people start realizing garden can make some profit to the activate the region and the towns. So the owner of the Millennium Forest, he decided to organize a garden show as another engine to promote the Hokkaido garden movement. And it was very successful. And after the 3 years, 2015, the small town of the population of 3,000 people, and where we met each other, and that is the big challenge of such a small town. And we organized a kickoff symposium like this at the Sapporo, and he made a wonderful speech. And he said, many people ask me, can you organize such a small town to such a big garden show? And are you sure you can make a success? And his answer, I always answer, I don't know. But one thing is sure, if we don't do anything, our town will be losing the power. That is wonderful talk. And he really, and he continued, there's many small towns in Hokkaido of the people, of about 2,000, 3,000, and they are all suffering about the more number of the population decreasing. And but if we made a success, it will encourage the other cities and towns. And the garden show was very successful because of his challenging spirit. And I think the important thing is garden show should not be too big and how do you say, if it's organized in the big cities and try to invite too many people in a short period of time, and the site is so crowded, and the people does not have a chance to enjoy the garden itself. And it is very difficult to create a garden culture and relaxing the garden, those things. And also such a small town, and people really volunteer to work on this garden show because they really feel this is our garden show. If it's a big city, they can sponsor by the cities. But this is a small town, so they really have to work by themselves. And I'm sure that this garden show success made citizens confident to their town to revitalize, regenerate the things. And since I'm living in a small town in Hokkaido, and I have a different point of view living in a big city landscape architect. It was a great experience. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, President Takano. So from what you said, we need to pursue slow life and how we can connect that to garden shows. I think that you gave us insights into that. Thank you very much for that remark. Next, I have a question to Mr. Pete Adolf. So the theme of this symposium, the International Garden Symposium 2020, is Garden, the Future of Cities. So given this, we would like to create a space like Homelo, a romantic space that attracts bees and butterflies and embraces the beauty of the four seasons in Korea, in cities in Korea. But if we were to do that, of course, that would entail many complex elements. What would be the most challenging element of creating such garden, and what elements should we focus on when designing such space?
Yeah, it's the good thing is we created a garden in Homelo. It took us 20 years to get people, let's say at least 10 years to get enough people to have a living there. So I wouldn't create, maybe it's different in Hokkaido, but we do gardens in cities, or at least close to cities that people can travel easily or find it easily. Today it's easier because a garden, the public gardens we've done and done together with other landscape architects, they are, if you do them well, I think people will come and travel a long way to get there. You probably know this Millennium Forest in Hokkaido, that is very well known all over the world. It's also because of you introduce people that have a name of garden making, have a garden to, let's say, a good eye for aesthetics, and most important is to have a good staff. So most important that is in all my work that people take care of your work and that they encourage it. And let's say that they develop it in their own way, because what I notice in, let's say maybe that's not a question, but what I notice in Chicago and the Lurie Garden, that we have a director of horticulture that is so involved that she sees it as her own garden. And if I look back 20 years ago when we started, in 2000, the competition was there. We had 3 female gardeners that they all had the same passion. That was the garden that they were taking care of. That was a Lurie garden. the design that I made is not the design that you see today, but it's still the same intent. So it's a diversity of plants that work well together in a good competition. So they don't push each other out. There's a good communication with me and the head gardeners. We go there every 2 years, every year, and or every 2 years, and then we just talk about. We assess the garden. We walk through it for 1 or 2 days, and we see what is changing, what is working and not working, and we discuss that. And then, we take action, or they take action. And there's suggestions from both parties. I asked, for instance, I asked the head gardener, what do you think? What should we replace it with? And they come up with a number of plants that we could do, and I say yes, not that, and I give. We discuss why not and why. Sometimes I don't want it because it's not part of my palette, what I would like to see together with the other plants, while it would work at the same time, but I think doesn't fit in that picture that I have in mind. Other times it's totally right, so I just say, yes, let's do it. So without a discussion, I won't say, I like it because you like it. I won't say you do it because you think it is the best thing for the garden. It's more that I feel they have the right to have their own voice in the garden as well. And that is how I discuss my gardens with the gardeners. I think that is very important in public space. Where I can imagine that our garden, if you say Hummelo, it's of course 1.5 hour drive from the big city of Amsterdam, but still people come. But why did they come? We started with a nursery with plants that were rarely available. So first people that came were gardeners and gardeners travel for plants. They travel over the ocean for a few plants, whether they are plant hunters or plant lovers, they travel for plants. And that is how we became very well known, not for our gardens. That came extra because we trialed our plants in the garden, and because I feel myself more a designer and plantsman at the same time, so I had the idea that we could create that gardens or plants could be the tool to express myself in a certain beauty that could bring people, let's say that I could please people with. Also, it was an expression of what I felt. So I might, you see me maybe as a good talker, but in the beginning, the only thing I could do was to show myself with what I did with plants. So it has changed over the last 20 and more years. But so I think plants were what people brought people in to our gardens. Also, people from plants, most of my friends were plants people. They were no designers. So every conversation I had was about plants. Every conversation was what plants could do to people, and that's why I found that the characteristics of plants were very important in my work. It was not about the flowers, it was more about how plants could speak to you. And I thought if you put that in a good design, so we developed our gardens together with our nursery, and that together made that people came also for our gardens, for a sort of inspiration, what they could do with the plants. So it came from plant lovers to garden lovers, and I think that is where it ended too. So to start a garden in a small place, unknown place, as an unknown gardener, might not work. You need a name to bring people in, or some attraction that is already there, that you can connect your garden to that attraction. A big city, the good thing of a big city is that they sometimes have more money than small towns. They can invest in a garden, they can invest what they do in what I would say, botanical garden, so they also can. A botanical garden, of course, has this place, has garden nowadays, very educative, but it's a complex of gardens. But if you isolate one garden that is beautiful and just aimed on the beauty of that garden, where everything works together, the plants and everything that comes to it, so all the creatures that come and fly into it and move through it, I think that and you focus on that, people will go for that as well. But so I see there's so many opportunities, but you need the right people to make it right. I think that is important. I'm a collaborator. Everyone knows that. My office is empty. You look behind me, there's nobody in the office, and that's me. So everything I've done together with other people. Always in collaboration with architects and also with science. Sheffield, you probably know, Mike, that I know most people there that are very emphasized on perennial plantings in public space. So that is also my learning process. What other people do is also for me a learning process. And you don't need to be a designer to do good planting. I think if you put plants together in the way that they belong together, it also looks good for people. That I have a little bit of talent that I can just add a little bit of salt and pepper on top of this. That makes it work good for myself, but also for the audience to make the difference. That is what I would say. Every city that has the idea to make a garden should do that. Because if you have the idea to make a garden, then you have the power to create the money, then you have the power to get the people together that can make it. And if you have the people that can make it, and they will tell you that you need a good gardener. Otherwise you will fail in what you do. So it's also in our world, it's one big circle, from the beginning till the end. And that's what most of my work that I've done, I always say it's not only by me. I can just start something, and then it's going to life, and then we need all the other people to keep it going. And just to end this plea for gardens, some gardens already live for 20 years, perennial gardens, because maybe most people don't think that I do shrubs and trees and everything. I've done a lot of woodland, but young woodland is not interesting for people to go to because they see young trees with nothing underneath, a lot of weeds before it really becomes a wood. So my work is rather dynamic, and that also is part of why it attracts so much people. That is what I want to say. Maybe it's not a question, but at least it's something I want to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piet Oudolf, for that remark. Thank you very much for that remark. So in Korea, we say that we have to have an endless talk, and we love endless talks in Korea, and I hope to do that with you once.
That concludes the first session, but we are lagging behind the schedule. We are about 30 minutes late. So from the second discussion, let's speed up a bit. So as the second part of the discussion, we will have one theme to have a discussion between panelists and presenters. So for the discussion, we'll start with Fumiaki Takano, followed by Natasha Dever, Mike Munder, Dr. Soyeon Park, Ino Kim, and Yumi Lee, and Piet Oudolf. So we'll go by this order. First off, I'll give you the theme that we'll discuss on. Through the presentations by 8 presenters, we talked about the various solutions in urban regeneration utilizing gardens and parks. In the future, I believe the voluntary participation by citizens would be a key driving force. So to give you the theme for today's discussion, in creating and managing green spaces, how can we attract and encourage voluntary participation in terms of the design and programs or institutions? So if you can give us some solutions based on this and based on your experiences, that would be helpful. So we'll begin with President Fumiaki Takano.
I think I already answered this question before about the movement of the Hokkaido, garden movement in Hokkaido. But I think the important part is they really feel like the part of the program and the event, not just helping to the planting something. I think they need more higher motivation, be a part of the team. And so they can feel more initiative. And like the mayor of the Kamikawa city, Mayor Sato, he talked to the citizens and the village people why he is organizing this and why it is necessary to do such an event, such a small town of 3,000 population. And that really touched the heart of the village people. So the end of the garden show, many people start talking on the garden, in the garden, my garden. That means really they feel like they can really proud of this garden. And this is a place they took their relatives and their friends visiting them. And since this is becoming very popular and goes on the news, TV news program, and they really feel like they can proud of it because their name of the town was never appears on the news before. I think those are the very important, giving them much higher motivation, just asking them to help taking the weed and planting the flowers only. I think that is a very important part for the, and also another important part is we organize a garden show in a longer period of time, and spring, summer, and fall. So they can enjoy the three different seasons of the garden, and they can enjoy the changing their maintenance and participation. So that is important thing, I think. And also for example, the Asahikawa garden near the station, that is since they're very close to the city, and this is the center of the city area, so every people is accessible for that time. And they are really proud of, and they always bring their friends to show, and they are guiding their friends to show them. So that is important. And also, since we organize a garden show in a longer period of time, so we have more chance to organize many study symposium and lectures, and inviting the famous gardeners from international, and those gardeners, head gardeners from the Great Dixter, Mr. Fergus, he is really loved to teach the people. And many head gardener from Hokkaido go his garden and train them. And that garden show have creates lots of interesting exchange program. And that is influence to the citizens too. So those are I think important. It is citizens' participation is not just helping to planting the thing or not just helping taking the weed. I think it should be much higher interest to create them.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, President Takano. So, in addition to the first remarks, you gave us more details. Next, for the same theme, we'd like to ask the opinion of Natasha De Vere.
Thank you. I would like to reiterate many of the points that have already been made. So first of all, the importance of active engagement, whether that is physically or intellectually through citizen science programs. So anything that makes us connect with our gardens and the biodiversity within it is really important. But also this sense of ownership, and in particular, not just ownership, a sense of being a protector, so of being a protector of a space, so that what you do and the difference that you can make, you have a kind of personal connection. And then something which was very important here in the UK, we had a period of lockdown during COVID where we were only allowed out of the house once a day. And during that time, many people would have a daily walk. And for many people, it transformed their view of their local area, and often that was of a public space or a garden. And those green spaces became so crucial. And one of the key things was that sense of seasonal progression. So even though the world seemed to be in disarray and so much seemed to be changing and so much seemed to be frightening, there was the connection. It was during the spring, the leaves started to come onto the trees, the bulbs started to come up, the wildflowers gradually flowered. And that progression of nature, and that nature continues, even though it seemed to be such a difficult situation for humans, that was really, really important. So I think creating public spaces that allow that kind of daily and seasonal progression to be observed are really important. Thank you.
Okay.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Next, Executive Director Mike Munder.
마이크 먼더 이사님께서 발표하신 내용 중에
So
지역 주민인
you talked about the wildflower center at the river pool.
부탁드리겠습니다.
And can you please talk about citizens' participation in that context?
Of course, I'd be happy to. Firstly, I think there's been a lot of wise words before me, and Mr. Takano said that when the volunteers start talking about their garden, that is when you know you've got a success. And they love it, and we shouldn't be ashamed of saying that people love gardens and will invest in gardens if they love it. And they see the garden project as a higher project of something of moral, spiritual value, and that's often expressed through beauty. And I think we shouldn't be shy of talking about those values in our gardens. And the more we can talk about our gardens as a network that goes through the city and connects communities, the more valuable those gardens will be for our biodiversity and for the health of our citizens. And the ideal thing is each area of the city has a character that interacts with the character of the garden, so that the garden reflects the social structure and the ambitions and the interests of the local community. So I've been involved with wildflower sowings where the local community is consulted and they've discussed what sort of butterflies do they want to bring in? Do they want to promote seed-eating birds coming in and eating the seeds at the end of the year? Would they like to see more goldfinches? Or what is the local endangered bee, and how can we design a flower mix to support the conservation of that local bee? We've also learned that you've got to be intergenerational. You've got to talk to the kids and you've got to talk to the grandparents. And the more you can blend those generations, the more community support you have for your garden. And I've personally found when you talk about a garden, not just as a commitment for now, but as a place that you want to exist in 100 years' time, people react very favorably to that. It is their little bit of contribution to the next generation. It's their act of being a good ancestor. And gardens are a very potent place to build a commitment to the future and a commitment to a healthy society. So yeah, lots of unending conversations are needed, lots of cups of tea, perhaps the occasional glass of wine. But the more that process is done, the more trust and the more love there will be for your project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mike Munder. We had a rehearsal yesterday, and you mentioned about kimchi yesterday, so I hope I can offer you some kimchi next time we meet in person.
Thank you.
Next, I'll ask Assistant Professor So-yeon Park. When it comes to community garden, you mentioned a lot in your presentation. So when it comes to citizens' participation, you will have a lot to say. So please.
Okay, I think this is a great question.
좋은 질문인 것 같습니다.
Okay, I think the translation is actually, I can hear this translation. Could you mute it, please? Thanks. Yeah, I think design-wise, I think the engaging people in the early process of planning and design processes is really important. So we know the concept of participatory design. So basically, you can have the potential users of the site into the processes of the design and planning procedures. So for example, the senior citizen park, there was a small project in my town in Toland, Connecticut. We had the senior citizens into our design workshop and design charrette from the very early stages, so that we had about 50 people, around the 50, 60 people participated in that event. And then we had a midterm kind of presentation, so that we were communicating with them and they were giving us a feedback and input and everything, what they want, what they desire. So that it was really key to understand their wants and their needs to be able to implement the park. So the park that we created for them was actually donated by a family. So it's about 11-acre land parcels, and so we had a land and resources and municipality support and everything. But then they had us, really passive recreation activities. That's what they want. So, without really putting a lot of programs and facilities into the park, we really respect their need and try to make the current status, with the meadows and native grass areas and a lot of birds. And there's a forest and wood in the background. So we try to maintain that as a design element. So I think that engaging people into the design processes is really key, to have them retain their interest going forward, even beyond the design phases. And particularly as my role as a teacher in the college, I'm somehow obligated to educate and train the future generation of our landscape architects and planting designers and gardeners. So I think Mike has touched upon some of those aspects already, but I think our job is to not only to create the beautiful gardens and parks, but also train the next generation so that they can be a advocator for our environment, and they need to practice the sustainable ways for making our parks and gardens more beautiful and sustainable and viable. And so, we have spent more than $40 million in lawn care in the United States per year. 40 million, that's a lot of money. So we have a lot of water spent for that. We have 9 million pounds of chemical fertilizers and pesticide that all goes into the rivers and streams and all the dead zones and ultimately goes to the oceans. So I think we have a responsibility for the next generation to know the importance of native plants or regionally adapted plants and healthy soils and all those ramifications of having them. So the more they are cognizant of their practices, the more they would be able to participate in whatever gardens that they are designing later on. So maybe you can start from your home, your household, and you can educate the people, children, so that they can be exposed to and experience the nature. I think that's really important, whatever spaces that you're making. And then program-wise, because I'm in the college, we have what's called the Nature RX program. This is kind of prescription for students to know what kind of green spaces nearby, so that's another level of understanding that how we can increase the awareness of the green spaces that they can be checking out in their everyday landscape. But then I just want to highlight and point out that the citizen engagement and participation is not something that we can force them to engage, right? So to be honest, national and state local government almost have nothing to do in terms of that aspect. They can support with their resources and funding and etc. But actually, engagement is not something that we can force them to do. It sometimes happen in a very democratic way, and also very spontaneous way. So that just briefly, one example from Seattle here in the United States. We had a Black Lives Matter, so we had the death of George Floyd, the Black American who died, and so that there was a lot of demonstration nationwide. What happened in line with that event was that they actually created a community garden at the center of demonstration area, so that it was their areas to express their opinions and a place to gather and share their ideas with other people. I think it's and it just has remained and stayed even the demonstration is over. So I think it's more like a bottom-up approaches rather than top-down. So I think it's a matter of how we can make people be more active and raise their voices when they are a key players of garden designs or management. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for that remark. Thank you.
다음 순서로는 이곳 스튜디오 계신
Next, we have panelists here in the studio, but because we are pressed for time, I would like to hear from two panelists. First, Chairman Kim. Well, first of all, when it comes to garden, I think gardens are the best example that can involve citizens, because other public spaces require public efforts, but gardens are part of our everyday life. So it's very close to our heart. So I would like to talk about the Seoul Expo, the Seoul Garden Expo. From 2015 to 2018, for 4 years, it targeted the large parks. So it was more of the scale. But from last year, we've started to have standalone gardens, the small-scale gardens, and we started to explore the narrow streets in every corner of Korea. And that led to an extended expo. But given that we are faced with COVID-19, it actually gave us an opportunity to transform the large-scale gardens into gardens for our everyday life. And we also provided some training programs about gardening. So it's all about preserving the gardens that we created. But I think that maintaining and managing the gardens is more important than creating them. So because I think the effects can be much bigger. And of course, we need to engage citizens so that they participate on a voluntary basis. And we want to reduce trial and error as much as possible. And to be able to do that, we need education and training because we need experts who have the capacity to do that. So instead of spending too much money in creating gardens, maybe we can spend more money in education so that we can maintain better. And if it were not for COVID-19, we would have invited so many people to join us to enjoy the gardens. And it's a shame that we cannot do that. But starting next year, we want to begin creating new gardens. And we would like to be able to see more people join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Chairperson Yumi Lee. The Sejong National Arboretum is about to be operated in trials, so I believe you have a lot of ideas about citizen participation. This weekend, we will begin our pilot operation at our National Arboretum, so it's a D-3 days from the opening of the Arboretum. Listening to all the presenters, I came to think that the direction that our Arboretum is going forward is not that wrong. The pilot opening is this weekend, but we are already running various programs, and I'd like to introduce a few of them. For instance, we have a child care and practice program for a garden sector. There are some small parts of lands in the region and community, and those lands could be used by students. The students can first hand in their plan for gardening, and then we select a good project and good plans. And the students may not have enough ability to actually perform the gardening, so we match them with experts who can give some mentoring advice to the students, and abandoned land can be managed and tended. So it is about gardening and also educating and the training. So it has a good impact because the barren land and abandoned land is turning into beautiful space. So this is one project that we are running. We have a lot of projects, but many people are interested in the life-friendly garden, which is like a kitchen garden. There's a children groups and the housewives groups. So there are many local citizens who participate in the program in different groups. So they can actually cultivate the garden, and they can use the vegetables for cooking, and children participate for drawing and painting. And people who lead the programs are the experts in the local communities. It's based on the volunteering works by them. It's an interesting program. We also have a participatory garden. Within our Arboretum, we have some vacant spaces, which is called participatory garden. So it's not just for the Arboretum staff, it's for all citizens. They provide some ideas about those vacant land, and each group or each different parts of the citizens would come and cultivate the part of the land as a garden. So within the Arboretum, we have a garden, and itself is actually created and managed by citizens themselves. So we are running that program as well. Professor Ino Kim talked about the cases in Seoul City. If you see the cases in Korea, same for Seoul, and Suncheon Bay, it started as a national park, but now there is a voluntary garden tour program by citizens in South Jeolla area. every village has a voluntarily created parks, and there is a movement to create community gardens as well. So when it comes to citizen participation, I believe that it is very dynamic. So it is dynamic Korea, you can call it. It's very extensive as well. And listening to opinions of the experts, I believe that we are going in the right direction. To add, for a pollinator garden, we want to focus more on various other creatures, not just the plants, and I'd like to expand our programs to that end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson Lee. Oh, wow, so we are behind schedule, but still we would like to actually continue with the discussions, but Mr. Pitt Adolfo, do you mind if we ask the question in part 3? Not now? Is that okay?
Okay, yes, yeah, it's okay.
Yes,
Can you hear
thank
me?
you very much for your understanding. Yes, thank you so much. Then I will get back to you in part 3. So with that, we would like to wrap up part 2 of the panel discussion session, and we will begin part 3. Now, so we have 4 local experts and 5 global experts. We would like to begin with the local experts. Dr. Lee, we have Director Jin, and then we have Director Kim, and we have the global panelists. So based on gardens and parks, we would like, we talked about the communication with the citizens and cooperation with the citizens. However, COVID-19 has taken a huge toll on our lives. So we have to fight COVID-19, but at the same time, we also need to get ready for another pandemic like COVID-19. So what roles should parks and gardens play in times of pandemics? So that is the theme for part 3. Or in a post-COVID world, what roles should parks or gardens play? So you can choose either one. Yes, Dr. Lee? Well, of course, we spent much time at home, but at the same time, a lot of people are now willing to travel to less populated areas, and that is why they visit the botanical gardens as well as arboretums. Of course, we have to wear masks, we have to keep social distance, but they do still visit botanical gardens and arboretums, and they're impressed by the beautiful flowers as well as plants. And but of course, because now of the social distancing, they can actually feel the plants even closer, because before, it was so crowded and you could not really feel individual flowers. But now what they do is they can actually connect with the flowers and the plants. And I think that COVID-19 is teaching us how to treat nature. So I think that's one of the features of gardens as well as parks, and Mr. Piet Adolf talked about it as well. And we are about to open our arboretum at Sejong. Of course, while arboretums are great to heal us, it can give us peace of mind, but we need to focus on the maintenance part as well. I talked about the pilot operation from 3 days after. So in 3 days, we will pilot open the Arboretum, but we have to, keep the social distancing as well as visitors will have to wear masks. So we have to carefully design the movement of the people, how they walk. So at the same time, since we have so many events and displays and exhibitions for indoor areas, we will receive reservations for those areas. So no matter where visitors go, we want them to feel safe. And at the same time, we wanted to create beautiful spaces and also provide some booklets about how to nurse your plants, and at the same time we also provide various programs such as educational content for children. So we have a wide variety of programs, and we wanted to make visitors feel safe at the same time.
Thank you very much. I believe you actually had a lot to say, and sorry that I had to urge you to cut it short. Next, Director Hae Young-jin. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Amid the COVID-19, we still get so many visits and inquiries about the visit to Arboretum or National Botanic Gardens and even National Gardens, of course, except when it's not allowed because of the government policy. I believe it's because of the social distancing. These are the places with the less tiring socially. And even without the COVID-19 or pandemics, looking back on the past 10 years of garden research and the policy development, I believe that it is time for us to expand the functions and roles of gardens. Of course, garden can inspire people with well-designed and beautiful spaces, but now we have to shift the focus to its social roles and environmental functionalities, and stakeholders have to make more systematic efforts to that end. So for us, because we are the researchers of the gardens, I believe the cooperation between experts in the same field, this is something that was emphasized by many experts. Also the cooperation between experts in different fields and the cooperation between experts and the citizens are really important, and I believe we need to develop policies to put this into practice. We will consider all good advices from all of you today, and for our policy support and research development, I feel a great sense of responsibility for the future. I also feel that we have to come up with more detailed plans to secure sustainability of urban green through gardens.
Yes, thank you very much. Now moving on to the global panelists. Professor Park.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I was saying that here in the United States, we had started a lockdown in around mid-March. It was about the spring break, so we didn't know when we started, entering to the spring break, but we were not able to go back to school after that. So it was a little late compared to other countries. But I think the roles of parks and gardens in a time of pandemic, I think we should still provide a space for people to pause and reflect their lives and have some experience with the nature, because it's for respite, and then it can give them being recharged and healed, so that people are very tired about their new styles of the life, and then everything is not the same one that they were exposed to. So I think they should have the adjacent spaces for them to get out and be exposed exposed to the greenness and then have the fresh air and interact with the wildlife, and that will actually give them a kind of energy for them to be living their life in this new normal period. And the Dr. William Friedman is not here, but he's from the Arboretum, the Arnold Arboretum of the Harvard University. And as far as I know, that was one of the few arboreta remained open during the pandemic here. So yes, we need to be careful about being distanced physically, but we still need to be connected with others socially. So I just wanted to touch upon the roles of the parks, that we can still be connected with the people, and to have some time to interact with the park amenities and things like that. And then one example here, we have a really large park. It's called the Keynote Park. That is one of the largest designed landscape in the United States, and also one of the oldest municipality parks that was designed by the Olmsted Brothers Farm. And what they did during the pandemic time, that they were launching the social media page and try to be very active to connect with the resident and local communities, so that they were recruiting some volunteers for them to packaging the seed. Of course, keeping the physical distance, but they actually have the local communities pick up their seed and then plant their seed on their own yard. And so there is some kind of educating program that they can have, so that I think we need to come up with some innovative means of communicating with the public, not only for making the parks and green spaces still safe for them to be enjoying, but also kind of social spaces, not physically. We can't gather physically, but we can socially still. So I think the other things that we can think about is to still educate people about the sustainable and nature and things like that. So, and I think that virtual spaces will be the right now for us to incubate the ideas. And when everything is get better, then we can just come back with the kind of renewed mindset and renewed appreciation for the nature.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Park. Next, Executive Director Mike Munder.
Thank you. COVID has taught us that we need nature and we need access to gardens as part of city living. And I'm very impressed by those cities that have made a commitment to have gardens within set minutes of walking from your house. So the city of Nantes in France has made a commitment that you don't have to walk more than 15 minutes to your local park. And I think that's part of the democratic civic role of a city, is to provide access to those green spaces. They uplift the soul and give you access to another life. You step out of your apartment, you walk, you get your exercise, your focus is taken by the flowers, by the birds, by the butterflies. And so it's important for mental health, which is part of the resilience to all the challenges we're going to face over the next 50 years, whether it's COVID, climate change, biodiversity loss. So what I used to tell my students was that horticulture may be the slowest, but it is the most sophisticated of the performing arts. And we need to actually use our gardens to engage people and take them away from the pressures and miseries of COVID. And that builds on something that Piet said and demonstrated with the High Line in New York, is having these ribbons of gardens going through cities is incredibly useful, because that allows so many more people access to those gardens and really strengthens their role as ecological corridors that allows nature to permeate the city. So yeah, COVID has challenged us. And one of the things that's worked in this country is that gardens you have your own garden and you have the public garden. And one of the great things is that during COVID, people really valued their own gardens. And those people living in apartment blocks really valued their herbs, their houseplants, their cactus. And so a big part of a metropolitan response from a city like Seoul is to look at greening the house, the community, as well as providing access to public spaces. Thank you.
네, 마이크 먼더 이사님 감사합니다.
Thank you, Director Mike Munda. Next, we'll hear from Natasha De Veer. You ready?
Yes. Hello. Yes, absolutely agree with what Mike said of the importance of access to green spaces. So if we have new houses built, they need to have gardens. If we are in urban areas where gardens aren't feasible, then we should be within a short distance of a green space. I think something else which was really interesting during the COVID pandemic was that people love to grow something. So a bit like that kind of seasonal progression, also just growing a seed. So we had a project at the Botanic Garden where we sent out wildflower seeds for people to grow. And the emails and response that we got back of somebody taking that seed and nurturing and growing it and seeing that develop. Now, in order to do that, I think what's useful is to provide more training. It doesn't need a lot of training how to grow a seed, but for some people, they have simply never done it before. So access to be able to grow a plant, whether a single seed or to grow some vegetables which you will eat or to grow some wildflowers that you enjoy. And that provision of a little bit of training can unlock the appreciation and the well-being benefits of horticulture and gardening.
Yes, thank you very much, Director De Veer. Next, President Fumiaki Takano about COVID-19. Any ideas?
Yes, I have a bit different viewpoint. And I think in the past, people was aiming to create a big city, high density, high rise, and moving around very busy, and the globalism becomes very, very important. And but this pandemic, all of this is just against us. And if we try to keep the distance, safety distance, but we should not forget still many people are staying home, and the open space in the city is not just enough to enjoy all the people of this living in the big city. And on the other hand, the countryside where I live, its daily life does not change at all. We have enough safety distance. And the important thing is, I think we need to restructure our own countries. And if we still keep trying to create a big city, high density, I think we never solve the problem. It is just like wearing the shirts, and we had a mistake in the first button, and we never go to the right. And we have to start from the beginning. So I think it's a more larger target we have to discuss. We need to restructure our own country about the population density. And we should put more people move out from the big city. For example, some companies, maybe 70% of the staff no need to work in Tokyo. Maybe 30% need to remain headquarters, but the rest of the productive staffs or research staffs, they can live in the countryside together with their family. That will release pressure in the urban area, and also gives another chance to the rural area. And urban and rural is like a two-wheel of the car. If just one side is big and the other side is small and abandoned, it's a country never goes straight. So I think it is a pandemic gives us a good chance to think from the beginning.
Bravo.
네. 타카노 회장님,
Thank you very much, President Takano.
마지막으로
Lastly, we'll hear from Pete Adolf.
양해에 감사드림을 다시
I want to thank again for allowing us to skip the previous session. So the first theme was that when it comes to the citizen participation, how can we encourage the citizen participation? Was there any programs or institutions to encourage their participation? The second theme that we just asked is that amid the COVID-19 or in the post-COVID-19 era, what kind of the roles should parks and the gardens play? So these were the two questions. Can we hear from you?
First, you want to know about the participation of people in community gardens, or just about COVID? What do you want the question on part 3? My answer?
We want to hear your answers on both issues, but maybe we can hear about the COVID-19 first.
Okay, the COVID. Yeah, what I noticed of parks, that how we made them is that when we all noticed that parks are made for recreation, not for plants. You know, there are trees and shrubs, but mainly it's lawn where people, especially in COVID, overflew the parks. Too many people in the parks just hanging together, just drinking and sitting together. While I think the future of a park is more diversity in parks, that people, and of course more parks, that people don't have to think, okay, there's the park where I can just meet my friends, but also this community feeling that we can do more than just parks. Then the other thing is that the number of people in parks will be less. What I also noticed that these recreational parks, they stayed open. All the parks that we need for our soul, they were closed. Lourdes Garden was closed, botanical gardens were closed, everything was closed. Well, I think it should be the other way around. They should close this recreational parks first, and then, if necessary, at least recreational parks, they are easier to control. In fact, you can just move people out or let people in. At least you can reduce. But I think there was not so much control. So at the end, it went all wrong. So that is my thing about COVID-19. I think we need more diversity in parks, not just a lawn and water and trees. And so more diversity, that's what we all need. Then on community gardens, I think that volunteering, I think we, in New York, you have this Restoration for Parks project, which is in poor neighborhoods. It's a big organization in New York that raised, let's say, founded by Bette Midler. They put a lot of people put money in that foundation, that poor neighborhoods can be restored and made, community gardens can be made. And I think a lot of people take action in those little gardens. So the community will be, those gardens will be paid by donors through a foundation, and neighborhoods can be encouraged to, let's say, people get the interest in parks and plants as well. The same issue in Chicago. It's a big movement now for creating municipal parks. I know people that work on that and get grants from the city of Chicago to create in the poorest neighborhoods parks where people work, which otherwise wouldn't do anything than just go into crime. Then one more thing, we have just made a new part of a new botanical garden in South Delaware, which we work with 80% native plants. We had, it's an older community, so people are not really pensioned, but older. And I think you bring people together. It's a social aspect of volunteering, that people come together, work in the garden, can talk about gardening, can talk about plants. We have 170 volunteers there. So we have to make a schedule for who can come, because you cannot just let them in all at the same time, because then it becomes a party. You know that, huh? Then the same here in Utrecht, where a garden was built here in Utrecht, Holland, by 40 volunteers under the lead of a contractor. And the money was given by the city of Utrecht. So 40 people built the garden. The city of Utrecht built the garden, gave the money, but it's run by 40 volunteers on a daily basis. From the neighborhood. So it's a neighborhood volunteered garden. So that is also working very well. 40 volunteers, can you imagine? So the garden is now 5-6 years old. It's a big success. People come from all over the country that love gardens, go there. So that's what I want to say by volunteering. It's also a social aspect. It's also that, you encourage people by doing give them responsibility, give them a little part of what they are doing, and that is already mentioned. Then what a few years ago, 5 years ago, I got a big cultural prize. It was a lot of money, and I had to, half of the money I had to put in a foundation. And I called that Green in the Neighborhood. So we support people that want to, what you say, there's an empty allotment where probably someone will build houses in 5-6 years' time, and people want to garden there. We support them with a few thousand, maybe euros to buy equipment or plants. And I think that is already busy also for 5 years, that we donate $5,000 or $6,000 to 3 or 4 let's say between 1,500 and 3,000 euros for small communities that want to start gardening in the neighborhood for just temporarily or just buying plants. So that is what I know. And I think that is maybe enough. It's next to what you know, maybe a little bit of extra information. That is it.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Piet Adolf. It's been almost 2 years, 2 hours, actually over 2 hours that we started this panel discussion session. So last but not least, we would like to receive some questions from the viewers. Actually, we've already selected 5 questions, and to the 5 winners, we will send out prizes. But because we are pressed for time, we will entertain 3 questions only. So, Director Jin, can you please go over the questions? So ID is Im Seo-young, and the question is addressed to Mr. Takano. You talked about the 7 gardens, the Hokkaido garden corridor, and what was the motivation behind the corridor, and what were the elements for success?
I think before they are competing each other. They were the rival as a private garden, commercial garden. But the great thing is the next generation of the garden owners, son, daughters, their generation network together. That is great. And the motivation behind it is they does not have any sort of the rival feeding each other. They are more friendly each other. So that is a success. And they they made a pamphlet and they went to, if there is some big garden event in Tokyo or Osaka, they go there and they distribute, please come. And also they visited the tour company. And so they organized a bus tour visiting, and it was very successful. So that is a story behind of the success. And also another is one of the garden is a Garden of the Wind becomes a TV drama as a stage of the TV drama. And that TV drama was very popular. And that was also generates people to come in. And also the 7 garden each garden has a different background. Millennium Forest is owned by the newspaper company, and some other as a sweet company, and some other as some deciduous trees nursery becomes beautiful as a garden. And beans garden, bean produce garden, the hotel-owned garden, and farmer, rice field farmer made a garden. So then each garden has a very different background and a good history and a good quality. That is a success.
Thank you for the detailed examples and answer. Second question is for Natasha De Veer by Gwangnung-sup, Lunchtime. So, for the spread of gardening through volunteering, what are the things the municipalities have to prepare?
I think the infrastructure of the volunteering is very important. So it's how we provide those opportunities. And what is key to that from the training that we've provided is sometimes it's very easy to already preach to the converted, so that people who already know about gardening, you provide training to those people. The difficult thing, but the most rewarding thing, is to try and engage with people who have never volunteered or who have never been involved with plants or gardens before. How I try and do that in my own practice is to start small. So don't say, come and do a day training course in pruning plants. It's too much. Start off with, here is a seed, have a go at growing that seed. And if that inspires you, then come and do a little taster session. If that works, come and do volunteering. So we build a pyramid of participation from engagement to training, to volunteering, and a greater sense of ownership. But to get to our volunteers, we must begin with a broad base of engagement and work up.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. Last question. ID is IJJ to Mr. Piet Adolf. So Korea has many slopes, such as mountains and rivers, so that's how our territory is shaped. How can we create gardens given the landscape in Korea, the slopes in Korea?
Depends on the slopes, of course. It's all about, what do we call a slope? Is that a mountain or a ravine, or is it just a rolling landscape? So, the question is good, but it is not explicit enough to know what to give an answer. I think maybe someone else can give an answer, but I think. If it's too steep, you have chance of erosion. So that is the only thing but gardens can be created everywhere, as long as we take in mind that you cannot just destroy everything to make a garden or to run into the infrastructure as it is. Yeah, it's a question I cannot really answer in the fact because it's not specific. In my opinion, maybe someone else has an opinion about it that in the panel.
너무 어려운 답변이라
That's a really difficult question, so I'll email the questioner personally later.
Yeah.
This actually wraps up the part 4 and it concludes our discussion. So far, including the keynote speech, we had 8 presentations on certain themes. Out of that, Director Hae-young Jin had a presentation which was about Korea's garden policy, and I believe it explained well about Korean garden policy. And keynote speech, other 6 presentations will be referred to and will in establishing our agenda for our future garden policy. So I hope that you can converge and combine all of this for the second and the third basic plan for garden furtherance. And I hope it can all be reflected in your plan. We began at 7 p.m. in Korean time, so it's been over 2 hours. We organized the International Garden Symposium under the theme of Garden, the Future of Cities. I thank all the audience, and we thank especially to the Korean panelists and presenters from overseas. This concludes the International Garden Symposium jointly organized by the Seoul Metropolitan Government and Korean National Arboretum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for moderating the session so well. With the panel discussion session, we would like to close the International Garden Symposium 2020. Thank you very much for staying with us until late at night. So thank you very much, viewers, and thank you, panelists, for your time. So many people asked questions on our website, and I would like to present the 5 winners that we chose. And the 5 winners, please make sure that you send us your names, YouTube name, as well as contact and your question to igs2020secretariat@gmail.com by this Friday. Make sure that you send us your email because otherwise your prize might get cancelled. With that, I would like to close the International Garden Symposium 2020. Thank you very much for staying with us until late at night. It's a shame that we weren't able to meet you in person due to COVID-19, but I hope to see you in person next year with a packed program. You can watch today's symposium via the Korea National Arboretum's YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Hi, we would like to take a photo together. So can you please give us just wave your hand for a few seconds? Can you hear me? 뭐라고 하시는데 안 들리는 것 같아요. Okay. 안 보이는 것 같아요. 카메라를 다 치워가지고 안 보일 것 같아요.
그래요? 그럼
네네.
그냥 안내 멘트만 해주세요 이제. 네, 감사하다.
Okay, thank you for participating for our symposium today. So you're released. So